Hey everyone, welcome back to Rhythm Railroad. This is a video on how I do my ground cover. There was a request on YouTube and I just wanted to make sure that I got that out there. So here's what I do. The ground cover I use is very basic. My technique is also very basic, but it's effective. It's enough to, for an N-scale layout, it's enough to make it look realistic. I think what makes a ground cover effect realistic is that you have different heights and different variations in vegetation. So, but at the same time, it's weird if you overdo it too much, and then it looks forced. So I've picked, the few things that I like to include, and that's what I'm going to show you as I go through this video. So. The basic thing is that you want your ground, or you want your first layer to be painted a light color, meaning this is going to represent like sand or very, very light dirt, so that it highlights. I think a lot of people that I've seen do this before, they go with a very dark brown because they're thinking, dirt is usually a darker brown. This is dirt from my backyard. But the problem with that is that if you make the base coat very, very dark, then it's hard to bring the highlights out after. Also, it makes everything look extremely dark. And even with my layout, some of the areas look a little too dark. So then you have to start adding, lighter grass, lighter colored grass, and things like that on top. So for me, it's worked nicely when I use this color. This is I've shown this before in videos. It's called Trail Tan, and it's a Delta product, Delta Creative, number 02435, and this is like cheap acrylic paint that you get anywhere at any craft store. I think I paid like 50 cents for this. Anyways, so I had already painted this months ago. I just never got to it. I did everything around it because I was working on the ballast and everything else in the scene down here. So I just, I tend to jump from one thing to another, and that's why things get left alone for a while, and then I come back to them, revisit them, and I find the hobby to be more interesting that way than just finishing everything on the first try or in the first session. Anyways. So I'm going to show you what I do here. What I have to do first is create some kind of sticky layer so I can put the ground cover down. So I use good old Mod Podge. This is a matte medium, and I buy it in bulk because I basically have to cover my or most of my layout in this stuff. But before I do that, I had a tree here before. I was just kind of testing it out, and it created a little hole in the plaster. So I'm just going to take a little paint and just make sure I cover that before I go on. Not that it's not a big deal, but I just want to make sure that it's not like a big white spot showing through. So, and while I'm at it, I'm just going to kind of cover anything I might have missed before. This doesn't have to be neat at all, because all this stuff's going to either get covered or it's going to have to look rough anyway. So don't worry about it, the shading, if it's not perfectly even, or if there's a hair. There's a dog hair right there. Well, that you might have to worry about. But anything like, there's like a little brown spot here from glue, or this, or even the spray paint that like leaked over from spraying the track. That's all good. That's actually going to help with the highlights and stuff. Then what I do is I just take some matte medium, and I could either dip the brush in or drip it down. What I do is I just kind of drip it in, just like that, and then just spread it like crazy. Just got to make sure with the slopes that you don't let it drip too far and then it goes into another scene. Not that it matters, because either way, this stuff dries clear. So what I'm doing right now is I'm just getting right to the ballast line and any other edges, just so that I create a kind of like a perimeter. And just be careful with your turnouts, not to glue the moving parts down. And this stuff pushes around nicely. You do have, it's a pretty decent window to work with before it starts to get really hard. So you have to kind of, work in semi-large sections, but not too big, because then you can't keep up with the rate at which the glue is drying. And I did make a pretty heavy pour there, so I want to make sure that I got it all, or at least most of it, covered. And I'm just, I'm pulling glue from other sections that might be a little heavy. And as you know, when you do ground cover, or you might not know this, but when you do ground cover, gravity is working against you. So any like steep inclines like this or drop-offs like that are going to be challenging when you get ready to put a ground cover down. And that's exactly why you want the highlights. You want those light spots, so that it actually looks like a cliff, like like there's some kind of like sand erosion or whatever you want to. I mean, that's the way I see it anyway. Like it's sand showing through. Or I live on Long Island, so it's like there's sand everywhere. So that's what I like to see under the ground cover. You can kind of see it as it comes through. It's not like really obvious, but you can kind of see it come through. So that's the effect I'm going for. I'm going to add a little bit more here because I didn't have quite enough to get to this edge here. Now the only thing I want to be careful with is the edge here is leading, is right over my port seam, and there's like a, I did a nice job with my concrete or my pavement here, and I just want to make sure I don't get too much stuff on there, because it might stick and then it's hard to get off. And anyways, so that's the layer of glue. Like I said, you have a little window to kind of get that done. So then I'm just taking, this is sifted dirt. It's not, I don't like it to be perfectly sifted. I like to have a little imperfection in there, so there's a few little tiny rocks and stuff that slip through, and that's okay. Then I just take a basic spoon. And here's the thing with this, you don't want to cover everything. You want to cover a general area. You want to give it a feel of this dark stuff, because this is really dark, and the dirt here on Long Island is very dark, at least in my backyard. So you want to kind of leave a little room for the sand color or the tan to come through. But at the same time, you don't want to you don't want to make it look too blotchy. You don't want to make it look like spots, because then it looks weird if it's just like perfect spots. So that looks like, that looks exactly like what I'm describing. It looks like spots right now, but you'll see it'll blend in once I add the rest of the stuff. Then while the glue is still wet, the next step is I like this burnt grass from Woodland Scenics. It's number T1344, just burnt grass. That's all it says. It was $8.99, as you can see there. I don't know if that's a good price or not, but I think so. And I do the same thing, but again, not going crazy. Not you don't want to cover everything, but you do want to go kind of over. Oops, see, that was a little heavy. If you do have that happen, don't worry about it. You can go back and add a little more dirt on top or whatever, and it might even look good. Who knows? And I'm trying to get right to the ballast line, but I don't want it to be perfect. I don't want it to be where like the grass is, where it looks like you took a lawnmower and perfectly mowed the lawn right up against the ballast. I mean, that's not realistic. And here what I'm doing is I'm just blending it in. Now, you're going to notice that the grass here is lighter than it is down here. And that's just simply because I haven't put the scenic cement on top, and I haven't let it sit for months. So what happens after the dust collects and everything settles, it tends to darken a little bit. So that's basically the next step. That's the general feel of what the rest of my ground cover looks like. And by the way, I like to keep things very consistent throughout my layout. I don't like to make it where it's like suddenly it looks completely different. So, you know, that's just me. I don't know if you want to do it differently. That's, I guess, it's your world. So, but I think it's more realistic when you see the whole layout and it looks like, oh, it's the same area. It's not, you know, two different planets. Okay, so that's that. Now you can go back with the dirt if you want, if you don't like certain things. I'm just gonna add a little bit like this, just a shade, and maybe up here. But that's gonna be pretty close to what I want. I do take a little bit of the darker green, like I'm talking like barely anything. This is blended turf and it's T49. It's just green. I think it's just called green blend. And I literally take it with my fingers, just a little pinch, and just very lightly and kind of high. Just go around, because what that does is just it gives you a little bit of a different shade of green on top. You don't want to put too much of this stuff. This stuff does not look real. It's too green. I don't think I've ever seen anywhere, you know, at least in the US, that looks this green. This is extremely green. Unless you're somebody's lawn or something, but naturally speaking, like naturally, grass tends to get a little bit yellow, if anything. So that's that. And those are my basic layers. Now, I'm actually glad I showed you this angle because I haven't finished this yet. This is just very, very basic. So that this actually should match once it dries. But I'm just gonna go ahead and do the rest of this before I go to the next step and show you what I do to lift, to give it a sense of lift and other vegetation as well. So I'm just gonna add a little more here. And just try to finish it off. My porch scene here on the right side is supposed to have like an oil, not a refinery, but some kind of holding tank situation. So I took these PVC caps, I think one's a 4-inch and one's a 3-inch, or the ones in the front are 3-inch caps, and I turned them into holding tanks, just basically by putting them there. The only thing I did add was I put plaster on the top of them, because there's like there's like a brand and other information, serial number or whatever they put on there, that was sticking out. So I found it easier, instead of sanding them out. Some people like file them out or sand them out. Instead of doing that, I found it easier to add plaster, since it's like a hole, and just fill it. And they actually came up pretty good. Okay, just trying to take the glue off my fingers. I got some glue on this, which is not good. Okay, so now, silly. Okay. Exactly what I didn't want it to happen happened. That's okay. I'll go back over it with paint. By the way, one thing that I've learned from this hobby is that you're going to make mistakes. So don't be afraid. Everything's, well, for the most part, everything can be fixed or masked somehow. So don't worry too much. I used to lose sleep over this stuff. It's not a big deal. Okay. Then, obviously, I'm going to the next step, which would be the dirt again. I'm just going to be a little more careful here, because I do have that, very narrow area there. I'm just going to kind of Again, not too much. So I don't want to get it all over that seam with the tanks. And the nice thing about this kind of ground cover is that you could always go back, even if you've had it down for like years. You could always go back and touch some things up, or you're not sure you like the shade or whatever it is, and it'll work. But I don't know if you can see it on the camera, but I'm already seeing this kind of take the same shade as that. It's kind of melting together better. So that spotty look, at least here, it's not as obvious anymore. And it gets better as it dries. So that's that. Now I'm going to take my burnt grass and do the same here. You know, obviously this is only going to stick to the glue, so if you do get it somewhere where you don't want it around the area, you can just vacuum it up. But grass tends to grow basically anywhere, so even if you get a little bit on the track or between the ties, that's okay. That happens, and you do see it on real railroads. Can't speak today, so don't worry about it. And the other part of this is that, for example, I'm not done. I still have to make this part of the mountain, the plaster cloth, and everything that I have to do to make the shape. But it's okay, because I've done it before, where like I'm done with a scene, like sort of like this, and I just throw the plaster cloth on top. It's okay. You can blend it in. It's so easy. Not a big deal at all. All right, so that's that. Then I'll take my darker green, wherever that went, if I can find it. Ah, it's right behind me. And once again, just kind of very, very lightly, just to give a hint. Of it. You'll be surprised how much a little bit of the stuff can go. You can see it across the room sometimes. Just a little bit. And that's it. That's basically it. This is exactly what you see there. Nothing different. The only thing is that this I did a long time ago, and I was a little heavy on the dirt because I was afraid of showing the sand color through, but in my other areas where I've done this before, it actually looks even better when the sand comes through more. So, now, you could either let this dry just like this, and then go back and put the scenic cement on top, or you could just go right to the next step. It doesn't matter. It's all going to glue together anyway. But sometimes I just get impatient, or I'm tired and I don't feel like doing it anymore, so I'll just leave it. I'll come back the next day and put the scenic cement on top, and it's totally fine. It doesn't have to be right away. But what I'm going to do, just to show the whole process, is show you what I do next. And I think this step is what really makes all the difference in a very basic scene like this, and something that's going to be more dense, more vegetated, so it looks a little bit more realistic. So this is the trick I use. Some people like this, some people don't. But this is the polyfiber stuff. You don't have to use scenic cement, but for $3, I mean, I've basically done my entire layout for $3. This stuff stretches out like crazy. And actually, you want to stretch it out. You don't want it to be all clumped up. So I just literally take like a little bit like that, just that much. And that goes a very, very long way, because remember, you're not covering the entire layout, but you want to go really thin, where you can barely see that it's connected. And you want to try to create awkward or very irregular shapes so that it's not predictable. If you just do little circles and little patches, it looks weird. So I do stuff like, I don't know if you can see that, but just almost like this looks almost like an S at this point. And the only thing I try to do is just tuck in the loose ends, because sometimes you get these like these like weird fibers that just stick out. It looks like Dr. Seuss, like little things that stick out. Anyways, and then it doesn't matter where you put them, but I try to make it look interesting. Try to make it look so that in my mind this stuff wouldn't be growing too close to the track because there's so much. I feel like there's more. It's going to always be more dirt than grass, so more earth tones here than actual green, because of the way the trains and the traffic and all the things that kick up, and any oil or whatever that spills through might not allow the vegetation to grow. So as you can see here, I don't know. Yeah, the video is showing it pretty well. I'm going to just zoom in. Just so you can see what's going on there. It blends in really well because it's so thin that you can't really see the actual fiber that much. So the only problem is that you want to get it so that the stuff's not sticking up, because that doesn't look very good on pictures when you have these fibers sticking out. So you want to try to pat it down a little bit. You still want a little fluff so that it sticks up, but not a lot. Okay, so then what I do is, this is a mix of white glue. It's just in a Poland Spring water bottle. It's white glue and water. That's all it is. So basically, scenic cement is the same stuff, but this costs a lot less. It's just annoying to make it. And actually, it's not white glue. It's Mod Podge, which is the same stuff, and water. I do one part, so I fill it up to around here. And then I guess it's like 5 or 6 parts of water, so that it's really diluted. And the reason you do that is because you don't want it to clump up. Then what I do is I just take my dropper here, and while I'm lightly squeezing the stuff out, I'm also pushing down. And the first time I did this, I saw it all leaking through, and I was like, oh my God, I just messed up everything around it. It's not a big deal. The stuff dries completely clear, and it doesn't matter. In fact, you want it to kind of leak around because it'll help blend things better. The hardest thing about doing this is that you lose track of where the edges are. So, because it's spread out so thin that you kind of lose track. But I've gotten used to looking at certain angles. Like if you look through like kind of this way, you can kind of see where stuff is sticking up. And you could always go back and redo it. Now here's the thing that I do, and you don't have to do it this way. I've done it both ways, but I take this stuff, which is a much browner looking grass. It's called Earth Blend, and this number is. I think the number might have gotten ripped off, but T50. It's right there. This is T50. It's called Earth Blend Turf, and again, it's Woodland Scenics, which is what I tend to get. But it's a very yellow looking color compared to that. But it still has greens in it. So what I do is I take, again, a little pinch, and I try to just go over only the turf areas, the polyfiber areas, because what happens is that it gets lifted. So this looks like maybe little flowers or wild grass or something that is growing on top of the grass. And this adds so much more depth to the scene and realism. Just basically changing up the color a little bit. Now again, you don't want to overdo it, and if you feel like you do, then you take a little bit of the burnt grass or any other color that you feel like blends better, and just kind of throw it on top a little bit. And that's basically all you got to do. So that, let me pull back a little bit on the camera, makes a huge difference. Sorry about the zooming. And again, you might not see it on the camera itself, but it here in person, it makes a very big difference. And obviously, once it dries, it'll look better on camera also. Okay, so I'm gonna make a few more of those. Here's the polyfiber. Again, you just need a tiny bit. Stretch it out. Maybe a different shape this time. This one has like 2 holes in the middle. This is a shape I just kind of randomly made. But stretch it out a lot. And just tuck in the ends a little bit. And plop it down. So this is going to be the next spot. No particular reason why, it's just going to be there. Then again, you take the scenic cement. You try to follow the fiber line. And if you get it on the flat spot, or like the previous surface, it doesn't matter. It's, nothing's perfect on this planet, so it doesn't matter. And then just try to kind of, follow it as best as you can. The only time I find that this looks a little bit weird is when you put too much. But, like for example here, I didn't put any fiber there, but if I just put a little bit of stuff, it looks like it's part of the growth that's kind of coming through. Doesn't matter. And again, I just take a little more of the burnt grass just to kind of blend it in a little bit. And just a little sprinkle does it. I'll put some down here too to blend it in. That's all. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to continue making those all the way through, and then I'll come back and show you the next step. All right, so now that I finished every one of those overgrown grass spots, I don't know if you can see all the way through, but I went all the way to the back, random order. The last step is basically to seal everything in. By the way, one thing I missed, and I didn't put it on my last segment, is that the darker green turf, I also take a little bit of that and throw it on top of the overgrown grass as well, because it pulls the color from the browner kind of flowery texture out. And if you feel like it's too much, once again, you could just take the burnt grass and go over it again. Now, I can go much further than this as far as adding more details. Like I'll take some of that sea sponge stuff. I'll show you what I mean. And just take little bits of it, kind of like right there under the bridge. And there's one right there. But I could always do that later. So just for right now, what I'm going to do is just leave it alone the way I have it right now and just seal it. And then I'll add that stuff later on if I feel like it. Plus, I'm going to be putting trees and all kinds of things on here anyway. But just that alone adds so much more texture. In fact, let me just pop this camera off for a second and show you what I mean. When you look at it from this angle, it looks so much better, because you can see the lift in the scene. So, just take you through that. I hope it's focusing correctly. Oh, there we go. Okay, yeah, you can definitely see it now. Yeah, the lighting was a little bit off. But that adds so much texture to the scene. And it's simple. It's not a lot to look at. The thing is, you don't want, at least in my opinion, you don't want the attention to come off the actual, what you're actually looking at, which is the trains going by. You don't want the scenery to be so crazy and so busy that you lose track of what's really, the focus. So, what I really want is just kind of like almost like a supporting scene, a supporting aspect to look at while seeing the train come through. So locking this into place is really simple. Basically, it's everything that you do with ballasting, which is taking some rubbing alcohol, spraying it so that it helps the glue seep in, and then making sure you get through the whole scene. So I'll just do a small section, and then you can, obviously I'm going to finish it off, but it takes a little bit of time, so I don't want to waste time on that. So I got one of these bottles for $1.49. There you go. At one of these cheap stores, and it works great. It doesn't get clogged up. The only thing I've noticed with alcohol though is you got to be careful with things that are painted already, because it does tend to loosen the paint a little bit and make it run. So if you don't want anything to run, try to stay away from that stuff. I've done this two ways. I could just take a spray bottle and spray the scenic cement, but the problem with that is that it requires a lot more covering. You got to be careful with the backdrop because it sprays on the backdrop and you get these little weird like spots everywhere, and you don't want that. So I found that you have more control with the dropper, so it's a better process for me, and it's not a lot to cover. I mean, I guess if I was doing like an HO scale layout where everything's bigger and everything just generally needs more of everything, then I might consider the spray bottle. But everything is relatively small when you're working with the scale. So even though it looks enormous when you're looking at it through a camera or when you're running small little trains through it, it's really not that much distance. I mean, this is probably 5 inches, if that. And you don't have to be neat about this. You still cover this stuff pretty quickly. And the alcohol obviously is what's helping move the glue around. Right now it's dripping all over the floor. I don't care because this stuff it's not heavy glue. I could just wipe it up as soon as I'm done. So it doesn't matter. I'm just worried about getting it on the seam right here. I want to make sure it's already on there. So I'm just gonna grab a paper towel. And what I do with the paper towel is that as I'm doing the scenery, I basically go parallel to it by putting the paper towel under. Let's see if I can show you that. So as the glue comes off the edge, I'm basically soaking it up so it doesn't make it down to the bottom. I guess that's common sense to some of you, but I might as well just finish this whole thing up. Okay. This is what I do. I just put the paper towel there, and as the glue comes dripping down, it just absorbs it, and it never makes it down to the seam. You just gotta catch it. You gotta see where it's going because it moves quick, and it tends to go like in the same direction. So there's like a little spot where it leaked the first time. That's where it's gonna want to go. You have to kind of follow it around like that. And it pulls it in pretty fast. So it's getting where it's supposed to go, and at the same time you're not getting it all over the other seam. I don't know if you can see that from the camera, but there's like little droplets that are just kind of sitting on top of the fiber. That's you're not going to see that once it dries, but you can just pop them off like that. It's all good. Okay, moving on. And these little narrow spots, you can't put too much alcohol here because otherwise you get all over the other seam. So it does take a little bit more for the glue to seep in, but it's not a big deal. Especially if it's not sloped. If it's flat, like the way it is right there, it'll eventually pull itself through. And, no worries. If you end up getting some of the stuff on the track, as you probably know, it doesn't matter once you take a Bright Boy to it or any kind of cleaning rag or whatever you're using, it comes right off, and trains run perfectly well through that. So it looks like I covered most of it. And it doesn't have to be like a ridiculous amount of glue either. It'll hold in place. There's some is always going to come off. And actually what I do is, after a while, after it has dried very well, I'll go and vacuum the whole thing, because eventually I'm going to have to vacuum the scene anyway. So whatever sticks at that point is what's going to stick forever. And whatever comes up, if it's too much, I could always go back and touch it up and do it that way. So that's basically it. Now it looks horrible right now because the glue has made everything look pasty, and once again the lighting is not right, clumped up and all that stuff. But once it dries, it'll look very much like it does in the real world. So like, for example, up here on this upper level, which is exactly why I'm making this video, because I did this. You can see, I'm trying to zoom in a little bit, you can see those clumps through the scene, like for example right here. So I did that the same exact way that I just did it down there. And I think it looks very, very good. It adds a lot of variety to the ground cover and the lift of the scene. So that's it. Later on I'll add debris and all kinds of other stuff. I might even add like a little trail, like using sand, for example, down here. A little thing like that. There's like a little sand, or I have little tricks for grass, and I've done like flower patches like that, or this I did here just to test it out. The little like overgrown grass things, and then maybe it was out of rope. It looked pretty good, but I'll probably make more. Those can always be added later. No big deal. My layout is extremely dusty right now because I've been working a lot on the upper level here, so that's why there's the water is full of dust, and eventually I'll vacuum everything up and make sure that everything's running before I start running trains. But anyways, that's basically it. What I'll probably do next is continue this up the mountain here, and obviously I have to finish that off over there. And I also haven't decided what I'm going to do with the fascia. I might just corner it the way it is right now, where the fascia just goes straight into the corner, and then like an L shape, or I might bend it so that it there's a little curve here. And if I do that, then I'll just fill it in with either foam or something there, and this way it'll have a full connection between the hill and this little triangle that would be made here because of that. So I'll decide that later. No need to do it right now, but that's basically it. Okay, I hope that helped with anybody interested in my technique for the ground cover. That's basically it. All right, until next time.